Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. And our 7 days of 7 podcasts continues. And actually, this is the last one today. Our celebration of the Style Council and the Honorary Councillors continues. Today, it's the turn of the fabulous Billy Chapman. Now, Billy played in the band Animal Nightlife in the 80s, and Paul Weller loved this band. So much so that he invited Billy to play with the Style Council, both on record and live in concert. So let's get into our final honorary councillor for now. It's Billy Chapman. Hi, Billy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This podcast series, you are the 7th in a week's worth of podcasts of honorary councillors. And we'll get into what that means for you and how you wear that badge of honour. First of all, I'd love to find out how you first discovered the music of Paul Weller. Was it the Jam?
Definitely was, yeah. I just left school and I was working in Holloway in display design. I was doing music in my spare time, as all the bands at the time, who everybody had the posters on the boards, the team, the girls in the team and things like that. They were all the bands, and including the Jam. And I was into the Jam quite a lot, actually. And at the time, Setting Sun's album I liked. At that time, I was a bit younger, but I remember it very well, that period of 79. So, yeah, I was like most teenagers at the time, with, into that sound, those sounds that were being played all around,
And at which point were you picking up the sax and realising that that was where you wanted to go in terms of a career?
I'd been playing at, just before I left school at Tollington Park, in Finsbury Park, and I'd just been sort of dabbling with it, with guitars and saxes. And I just literally was a bit of a hobby, really, in a sense. I was with some friends doing football, and I had friends that had been doing bands, and it turned out to be quite well-known people at the time. And I was a bit younger, and it was just one of those things. It was in the air, put it that way. And I was playing football with some mates of mine, and that was the early start of the band. We were rehearsing in Camden Town. It was just in the air, with all the punk thing that was happening. There's a lot going on, and it just seemed to be a natural sort of thing amongst all your mates and everything. It was just a normal sort of thing, really.
And the band that you mentioned that band was Animal Nightlife.
Yeah, that's right. Before that, I've been sort of dabbling with friends, musically here and there, and seeing bands, well-known bands over the road. I lived opposite the Rainbow in Finsbury Park, you see, so it was always bands on. We were all like football mates, really. Because everybody was going out and about in the West End and things like that, everybody was starting bands, basically. And Animal Nightlife started like that, really, with mates from the East End. And yeah, it's quite an interesting sort of opening up, really.
Very similar to the Style Council in the sense that it was a constantly evolving lineup, born out of the explosion of that dance and club culture in 1980. And Paul Weller absolutely loved this band.
That's right. We were at the end of that sort of period of 5 years when the new wave was moving on into something slightly new, and there were loads of bands that were appearing around, and Weller loved us lot with the sort of elements that we were a mixed bunch of people in the sense of music styles and tastes. So like I was in the middle of ska world and soul music, and I love blues and jazz. And then we had other members that were sort of like ex sort of new wave and all this sort of thing. We actually started like a punk sort of philharmonic, if you know what I mean.
Nice.
So it went out as a name as the Mile End Philharmonic at one point, which is just for a wind-up. I equate it to more like the Commitments. It's a bit like that. And so there was an interesting mixture of sounds and people, So we just started and it all sort of evolved. I mean, hanging around the clubs, I was one of the younger lads out of the lot, A lot of people that became influential later on in what was happening, Difficult to explain, really, but there were so many things going on at the time,
And it feels like yesterday, but actually we're talking 40 years ago now, so I appreciate that it might be difficult to remember every single moment of the stuff that I'm going to quiz you about. But the songs that we're talking about, Native Boy, Mr. Solitaire, Love Is Just a Great Pretender. And I was watching a clip, Top of the Pops 2, there was a clip, and they were talking about how I think it was Mr. Solitaire got this rush of sales, and how they, I don't know if you've seen this clip. It says there was a rush of sales from short-sighted Jam fans who thought that Paul Weller was Paul Weller. So basically, your band was Andy Polaris on vocals, Leonardo Cignoli on bass, Steve Brown guitar, you on sax, and Paul Weller on drums. But actually, Paul was on that track, wasn't he? Didn't he do backing vocals?
Yes. What happened? There was a few other members in the band as well. We had quite a few members. People like Mac and John and Steve was another people as well. The band kind of merged from a larger group of people, you see, as it went along. So, but going back to the point you said there, Paul Weller, what we had a situation with Paul's, obviously his name, there was a bit of a cross-reference mistake, but Paul Weller decided to sing on one of our singles, and to pay back the, sort of vice versa compliment. We were kind of like, it was a mutual appreciation thing going on,
Right.
So he did actually sing on one of the backing vocals at the time.
So the fans weren't that short-sighted, but DC Lee sang with your band on occasions as well.
Absolutely. Before Paul, she joined Style Council, she was one of our backing vocalists, Dee. And so she was going out live with us, and then she sort of moved over to the Style Council early days. So yeah, that was quite interesting, because I've got some amazing photographs of Dee in Madrid with us on the tubeways of Madrid when we were doing like really well over in Spain at the time, and it's just incredible to think, we're all so young, of course, but she looked amazing, and we played Ronnie Scott's with DC Lee as well.
And what was it about Dee that's special? Because you then work with the Style Council, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we've not touched on Dee a huge amount on this podcast so far, which seems nuts. But I mean, she's a very, very special singer, isn't she?
Yeah, she is. I mean, she has the qualities that that I personally was very much into. A lot of the sort of across the pond, as they say, the American and the British thing, and she had a lot of qualities there. It was just the right fit, really. She had a lot of nice qualities there, I think, with Dee. I mean, I don't know what she's doing so much these days in the sense of material she's into, but at the time, it seemed the right sort of thing, and it was a good time, with a lot of those mixes of the types of music and things,
So how did the crossover come for you working with the Style Council? Because that journey between the two bands continues all the way through, because your band continued till 88, the Style Council continues till 89, and that final Rejected House album.
Yeah.
So there's obviously a crossover where you're playing in both bands to an extent. How did Paul poach you over to the other side?
I believe there was something in what I was doing, with the expressions, I suppose. There was a colour to what I was playing. I think he believed in my ability, and I felt very complimented and very proud to be part of that very early start. Well, it was at the beginning, really, because we were all sort of starting with these newer sounds, or experimenting with newer sounds, and I think those are the areas that it makes you sort of think of a road ahead, I think. So I think with my sort of elements, there was, like most players at the time, was at the very early sort of start points. So, I was just one of many, really. But I just think we fitted with a direction. We was all basically going out as people in the nightclubs and that as well. That was part of it was all kind of like sort of association and friends and things. There's a lot of that going on as well. Meeting up in London in the clubs and bars and stuff. So there's a bit of that going on as well.
Can you remember the first time that you were in the studio with Paul?
Pretty much. On the Café Bleu album, well, I remember doing the two tracks I did.
So this is My Ship Came In, which for those, so Café Bleu is the debut album from the Style Council. In the US, it was not called that, it was called My Ever-Changing Moods in the US. And that track, My Ship Came In, isn't on the US version. So our US listeners, of which there are 3, our US listeners may not know that track, but you also played on Dropping Bombs on the Whitehouse.
And the track was done before the name, because Paul, being quite a amazing, prolific writer, he would we were just doing it all as it was happening in the studio. I just blew in the studio. I just remember just blowing whatever I could off the in the studios on the fly, really. Yeah. I mean, look back in it now. I mean, it was quite a wonderful thing to be in a studio of that quality as well. I mean, we're talking solid bond, right? I just enjoying the process, to be honest with you. It was just great,
Our Favourite Shop is another album that comes around a couple of years, a year later, which is massive. And many people consider to be their best work, their finest work. And you played on a track, this is a real rarity as well, which Steve White, so the drummer, Steve White, part of the Style Council, wrote the lyrics for, With Everything to Lose.
Yes, that was the soundtrack that became Ever Had It Blue on the Absolute Beginners film. Yeah, so it had With Everything to Lose, and I remember watching Steve doing his drumming, literally standing there. It was very impressive, his jazz techniques and things. I blew a solo, and I remember Gil Evans, with famous Miles Davis arranger and producer, he was doing all the horns and stuff on the film arrangements for the film. So it doubled up as a soundtrack as well as a track on the album. So for the film, all the bands like Sade and that, everybody had a contender for the soundtrack. And so the whole of London and Plus was involved in that one. So pretty much it was the same thing. But like going back to the actual recording of it, I thought it sounded great, and I was very, very proud to have been involved with that one.
No, it's a terrific song. And again, Our Favourite Shops was called Internationalist in the US for our 3 US listeners. But there's a lovely clip of you on Terry Wogan, which is Have You Ever Had It Blue, actually, talking about that, where the band it's the white Levi jeans, there's the brass section. I've got a feeling the female vocalist was from Animal Nightlife as well, replacing DC Lee at the time. I don't know if you can remember this clip where Steve White's essentially playing drums standing up at the time.
Yeah, well, I've got some sort of vague memories of it, but yeah, there was a lot of the tracks sounded fantastic, and I think really the best version I like of it is the live one at the Wembley when we did it live, and I was just had to go and blow a solo in front of the band, which is an orchestra with all the horns and that. I think it was Mike Mowers playing flutes and things. And it was just, I felt amazed by that. And it was just incredible feeling for me to be playing Wembley with that moment, with that piece of music. And I think you're right when you say it captured the mood. I think when I think of the Star Council, I think of those qualities like that.
Many of our honorary councillors have talked about the fun of the band, and the fact that it felt like a bit of a youth club at times has come up because so many of the band were really young, like 17, 18. But did it feel that way for you as well when you entered into the live arena and started playing with the band on tour?
Well, yeah, because you're talking, I was so impressed with being part of it. You know, it's like, is this actually Paul Weller, if you know what I mean? It's a bit like that, really. Because we were just like normal, kind of getting on with it. But then you suddenly realise that when you go out and do something, that this is like the guy from the Jam, you know, and so you forget that you're talking in normal ways, and suddenly, you know, you're just talking music and getting on with it. When we did the rehearsals, we were just like really experimental, I suppose. We all kind of were trying to be, as like you do when you're around 19 years of age or so. You know, you're trying to go with the reality of it as well as and I remember just sitting down, just thinking, this is incredible. I didn't know how to handle half of it, because it was like, it was all brand, you know, it was on a bigger scale, of course. And, you know, the equipment was there, and it was just like, wow, you know, and the sound, of course. Yeah, I remember thinking the rehearsal studio was just incredible for me. You know, it was on a scale that I'd never experienced before. So, you know, with all the space and the PA and everything. Yeah, I think what was nice was we'd all be sort of joking about most of the time. You know, there was a kind of nice relaxed feel about the whole thing. Looking back on it, it's just one of those things that happens, isn't it? You're just sort of those people are all we're kind of all etched in each other's lives now in that way.
It's magical. The honorary councillor badge is one that you wear with pride, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, I kind of, whatever I do in music, when someone mentions the Nightlife and Star Council time for myself, I feel very proud, especially when you get things like when I did the sax on You're the Best thing, and it's been used. I mean, I've known people who own restaurants and bars, and they got married with this song, and they say, you didn't play that. And I said, I know, I'm like I feel just so honoured, you know, to have been part of that song, you know, the 7-inch single that is. That was, I mean, I didn't get it. I mean, I just go along with it. Oh, yeah, great, you know, and so I was like, can you please play it and all this. I've had all that sort of thing of it, you know.
I should have asked you to go and get your sax. Damn it.
Well, you know, another day, Dan, another day. I did a reunion with Anthony Harty, the bass player, in Coventry with him, and in one of his birthdays, I think it was, and a few years back. We did a reunion, and I played with him those songs. The Hazel O'Connor were there and a few of the specials and things like that. And they was having they had a kind of a reggae sound, which was pretty amazing. It just sounded as fresh then as it did back in all those years ago, you know. I loved that. That was great, you know.
The great thing about your time as well is that I think there were, during the Star Council's existence, there's been subsequent stuff, but there were 3 live products released, a Home and Abroad, which was all the tracks taken from the Internationalist tour, essentially, which was a live LP. Yeah. There was also, you mentioned Wembley Arena, there was also this live VHS at the time, and also CD video, whatever that is, which was Showbiz, which was 1984. And then you were also on Far East and Far Out, which was the council meeting in Japan. So the 3 takes of the live stuff have you on it, which must be amazing because you've got a record of that too.
You know, I look at myself as a young person walking out in such a situation thinking, how did that happen? I have no idea. In a sense, you couldn't plan, you know. But there's a lot to it that's quite good. I mean, I used to play The Whole Point of No Return with soloing with Paul, you know, and I felt, you know, we just improvised, you see. I'm quite a big auditorium, just an improvisation there. And I felt but the problem for me was I wouldn't stop playing. So it was like, you know, I'm a typical saxophonist. So I'll play, you know, I'll just keep playing until you tell me to shut up, basically. So, I mean, I'm quite proud of that, you know. It was just purely a musical thing, you know. It was a lovely, enjoyable experience. You know, I was only young and, you know, we're all so young and you're trying to keep confident in such a situation. It's been great. So, yeah, I get a lot of comments from people, you know, all this time later, you know.
Well, Showbiz there are clips of Showbiz on YouTube, so if people want to check it out, it's one of the things for me, the Showbiz Wembley Arena stuff, it's such a good look. You know, Paul's got this sharp haircut, Dee, the white beret, the jackets that you all got, the white Levi's, all in blazers, there's strings, there's horns. It's a great sound, but it's also a great look, isn't it?
You know, when things get to a scale of success, I mean, I suppose you don't know whether it's where it is in the timeline until retrospectively when you look back on it. But that was a real peak of a moment, I think, because everybody was obviously looking, you know, the part and everything, and it was the sort of it meant to be. It's one of those meant to be moments, I think, and it still stands the test of time, right? The sound, could you imagine the sound? I mean, that was a live recording, so you know, and all the players were fantastic, you know, were back line and everything, you know.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's incredible that, well, I mean, one minute you were playing the clubs in Europe, the next is the big stadiums in Japan and the US and, you know, Wembley Arena, like I say. It's incredible that, and in a really short period of time, but you all sound so tight together, but you all look like you're having fun, but it all works because of the quality of the songs, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I mean, you know, when you realise what you're dealing with material, the lines that were written, you know, the horn lines. I mean, can you imagine standing behind Paul Weller with Long Hot Summer and he's playing the Moog and he's playing, you know, the old 70 synth on the bass line. And you're just thinking, what a moment, you know what I mean? And I look back at it now, it's one of the greatest moments ever, is Paul Weller playing a Moog bass on the synthesizer, you know. I've got photographs, Dan, of when we were rehearsing doing the sound checks and stuff. And I've got people dancing and laughing and joking. And they're just amazing photographs. And, you know, I've got to mention that, because I was taking loads of photos at the time. I got a camera as a present, and I was into this photography thing as a bit of a hobby. So I was taking pictures, and I don't want to sound too, what's the word, make a thing out of it. But I'm glad I did now, because I've archived some great moments in imaging there.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, you know, in TVs and studio stuff. And yeah, it's just great to look back on it when you think of all the places you played, you know, Sheffield. Oh, I'm talking about the Sheffield Lead Mill, and I'm quite proud of that one, because we played Move On Up, right? You know, you go from Japan to the heart of the UK. You know, these are the places of like the heart of the UK for me, because Nightlife played Hacienda in Manchester, you know, just 2 weeks after Madonna played it with a single holiday. So the whole of the UK was buzzing. All the cities were buzzing with all the bands. And so when you get catapulted into the other stuff, which is going to Paris or, you know, Japan and the States, like Los Angeles, we played the Wilshire Theatre in LA, for example, which was amazing for me. Apparently that's where they discovered Judy Garland. So I'm like, wow, are you serious? You know, so, I mean, I've got some lovely images there of that, you know, and I just think back on it, and yeah, it's fantastic. You're talking like the photographs are like a capture of time about that period of time, you know, and driving into New York, you know, coming off the airport, you know, I've got photographs. I mean, you just think, I'm sitting in the van going through New York with the Style Council. And when we came out the hotel, this is a nice story, this one. We had these USA mods turn up, and they were following the van, you know, mods on scooters following the van with no helmets on, right? Because they didn't have to wear helmets. And they opened the door of the van and just was making gestures and all this sort of thing. That's one of the greatest memories I have, actually. You know, being followed by all these mods, with Parkers, and they were Americans, you know. It was just great.
I remember Pat Gilbert talking to me about this idea of modernism being, you know, being a mod, being an individual, and then actually what you'd end up with would be hundreds of kids with the same haircut and all in Parkers.
Yeah, I mean, I was more of a soul lad, mixture of things. I was a bit of a mixture of things. You know, I had influences from all my mates from different things. I was a right mixed up. I went from from a crop scar lad to something else within 2 or 3 years, you say, and then that bleached hair with another, you know what I mean, and so on. So when you're young, and then the mod thing, I mean, obviously, you know, it meant slightly different things. But I think what was great about it was sort of like British youth, or let's put it that way, was really spot on, I think, in lots of ways at that time. And I don't want to sound too whatever, but I think looking back on it, we were quite fortunate, you know, our generation sort of thing.
I was reading I don't know if you've read the Soul Deep book yet, and there's so much content in there. It's one of those beautiful books where you open it up with almost like, I don't know, like snooker referee or snooker umpire gloves that you don't want it. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to spoil any second of it. I can only open it when the kids are in bed. It's like, bugger off, don't go anywhere near it with your grubby hands. It's lovely. But there's one thing I hadn't realised was just how many benefits and CND gigs and the Red Wedge and all of that stuff. There was the amount of gigs that you were doing as part of that as well was remarkable.
Yeah, I think the feeling then was a feeling of change, put that way. I mean, when you get older, you can overanalyze things, but when you're young, you just want to see a bit of change, really, and some of the perceived injustices of certain things, I suppose. You know, the stupidity of war. You know, it's the usual youthful. You address those areas, don't you? But I look back on it now, and some of it, I just think, well, on a minute, like we was in the middle of the miners' strike, and we got stopped on the motorway because they thought we were. This is true, right? They thought we were flying pickets, right? So there's all that. I mean, you're in the middle of the entire climate of the time, you know, as a band, going through the middle of it, driving through the middle of it, really. In a sense.
It's hard to explain to people if you weren't within. I mean, I was a young kid then, so it's very difficult for me to understand some of that as well. And certainly the early 80s. You know, I was born in 75, so it's quite hard to get your head around this. And
you're beautifully young, Dan. I don't believe that. 75. I'm 16 in 78. So my youth was spent coming out of the 70s into pretty much a polarized world then. Don't forget, we didn't have the context of, we didn't have any of what we got today, you know, obviously.
The other thing for you is that you played on the Cost of Loving, so the Orange album, the controversial Orange album in terms of, or at least in terms of the cover, but maybe in terms of record sales. But Heavens Above is one of the tracks. I love that album. I think it's brilliant, I have to say. There's there's Anne Stevenson on violin, there's Kamel Hines on bass, Steve Sidelink on congas, of all things. Yeah. What do you remember about recording Heavens Above?
Well, I remember all the players. I remember being there. I'm trying to get a memory. You'd have to jar it's somewhere parked in the back of my mind about the actual studio moment. But I remember speaking to Camille. I'm very impressed with what they were doing, what everybody was putting down. You know, I think it was a genuine sort of effort to do a really good thing. You know, there was always that feeling. You know, that what happened with my world. I was wrapped up in Animal Nightlife. You see, I've done an album and that, and been to the States and things like this. So my focus at that time, and I become a dad at the age of 24. I think it was 86. Yeah. My world was taken over with being a dad around about that time, and also the band Nightlife was doing pretty well, touring. Yeah. So I was wrapped up in that world a lot more than the Style Council world at that time. Although then I got invited in to do what you said I did, which is, I remember meeting Camille and Steve, obviously, and doing some work with them as I did, you know.
Yeah, you're right, because you were gearing up for the second album, weren't you, as Animal Nightlife? I know Island Records, you were part of Island Records from 84, and didn't they send you off to Philadelphia, was that right?
Yes, we did, and I'm very proud you've mentioned that, mate. That was, because don't forget, all this sort of thing was all our dream, you know, when you're lads, when you're in your teens. And suddenly you're doing all the music like Style Council and whatever. So your dream's coming alive. And we went to Philadelphia. We went to the studios in Philly. What's the name of it now?
Was it Philly Sounds or something?
Philly Sounds, that's it. The famous. Yeah. There's two of it. There's Philly World and Philly Sounds, and I always get them mixed up. Yeah, that studio was. I mean, it was parked right next to pretty much a motorway, like a red brick building. And you'd walk in there, and it was a major, major culture shock for me. And because Philadelphia was a different Philadelphia to today, but we were kind of like, you know, London coming with all these sort of love of what Philadelphia, you know, the music coming out that place is amazing. So, yeah, you know, it was just an incredible experience. Yeah. So the producers were spot on. the Bobby Eli's and all these people. They're all the top people that've done some amazing work with all the mate. And we had, Cissy Houston involved in vocals and things like that. So you're right in the heart of what's going on in Philadelphia,
And presumably Island Records, they sent you there to soak up the Philly sound or to work with those producers, I'm guessing?
Yeah, exactly that. We were walking in, for example, the conversations would start and they said, oh, we did all that sort of 25, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, So there was a bit of a mistake. Where is it that we were trying to get at was things they'd done in the past. So when you see them doing that on the mixes and some of the sound they were getting, it's just like, wow. And this not just non-digital as well. So the studio engineering we had 2 or 3 sets of producers. We sort of like go from one studio to the other studio. It was just, what an experience. It completely changed me as a musician working in that environment, because the positivity was something else, I felt completely lifted as a person, as a player, because who wouldn't be? You're working with some great producers. We always talked about certain people. Of course, everybody's impressing who they do and what they've done. We needed a vibe, for example, and backing vocals, and they got Cissy Houston in to do some backing vocals, Family of Whitney and all this sort of stuff. And then you've got, and I look back on it, it was a vibes player, Vince Montana. Now, Vince Montana did Heavy Vibes, was a big record in the London clubs at that period. When he turned up I think he had a Cadillac, and he opened the boot, and he helped him in with this great big set of vibes. And I went, my God, it's Vince Montana. It was just fantastic, Could you imagine? I mean, you hear these records, and then you meet this man, and he's like this big American guy, just standing there playing this beautiful vibes. Well, I was like, shook my head in disbelief at some of it now. Because we were all young and, we were all sort of trying to be whoever we were trying to be, as individuals in a band. You know what it's like. Everybody's doing their takes and things. And it was quite an interesting looking back on it, and that studio is quite legendary now, apparently.
And post-Style Council, for Paul, how have you felt about his material? We're on the cusp of yet another brand new album, Fat Pop, just around the corner. And how have you felt about Paul in a solo capacity? And what's life been like for you since? What have you been up to since the Style Council and Animal Nightlife?
From a point of view of Paul Weller's writing, he's always going to be writing. Great prolific writer. I mean, he can't, it's without saying, really. I liked the Pebbles on the Beach material. I love all that. And I think really it's just like we've all got our own taste, haven't we? So there are things that you could say, well, not for me, I'd like to hear. The last thing he's just recently been doing. I'm interested to see what it's going to be, this new one's going to be, to be honest with you. So yeah, I think there's always going to be a surprise there, which is what I think he's about. He always likes to move on and do something new, or try to diffuse something new. This is what the industry needs. It needs to feel a refreshing look at things, especially with what's been going on in the last few years. I think some of the industry's output, I'd like to think there's a bit of a flag being waved with Paul Weller, what I mean, all the time, to remind everybody, because I think that needs to be done for a lot of young people coming up. But anyway, going for myself, I just went off and did loads of different bands. I've been Ghanaian bands, which was like a Fela Kuti type band. I did that for a while through the 90s and that, and into the, I just kept hopping to different bands, really. Done a lot of writing with people on projects that people don't really know anything about, and I'm still playing. I've got into jazz. I've had a jazz quartet, play blues and jazz mainly. I've been in the Southwest. I've played at the jazz clubs in the Southwest, in Bristol and Plymouth. I'd like to think that with all what's been going on, it's kind of like a full circle. That's what it feels like for me anyway. Strangely enough, I've been forced to do things I would never have considered doing in the past. Pink Floyd material. There's a lot of areas there that you sort of think, I would never do that normally. But when you're forced to do things to make a living, it puts you in a whole new group or new genre of understanding. And that's, I haven't really listed it all, but it's quite an unusual. Like reggae, I've done reggae bands, ska bands, soul bands. I was with a soul band for about 2 years, with really good horn section, pumping horn sections.
And is the photography still a thing?
Yes, it is. I'm glad you said that, because I've been doing that sort of thing for quite a long time. And I've got some images that I'm going to get done, put out on the website for the Style Council stuff is definitely going out there. I've got some brilliant images, photographs of Dee, photographs of Paul Weller. I've got some real sort of like, wow, that's the moment there, isn't it?
It's that candid stuff, isn't it, that you don't see very often, of just the behind the scenes, the moments where they're off. I've
got a photo of Paul Weller, which if I want to show people, I said, how did you get that? It was on a coach. I was just snapping out the window and I just turned around. He was going to the loo, one of the loos in the coach, and he had a cigarette in his mouth. He turned around and looked at me, and I just clicked it. If you see this image, it's so iconic. You're thinking, my God, it's just like couldn't have planned it. It's just a completely off the cuff moment. And the Animal Nightlife stuff with Dee and dancing on the underground in Madrid is just beautiful.
You need to get that out to the fans as soon as possible, and make a few quid as well.
Well, yeah, don't we all? I mean, it's just it. But the thing is, I'd like to put it all done in the right sort of way as well.
Yeah.
See, to me, the Jam fans and the Style Council fans are kind of like two groups in the sense they intermingle, I suppose. But
it's funny, isn't it? Because for some, there's a real cut-off, and that's absolutely fine. I'm not criticising, because I feel that the Jam was, for so many, it was like that's their band, and when that split, it was like music almost ending. It's like I'm not interested in Weller from the Style Council or the solo. It was just the Jam for me, and then others didn't like the Jam, loved the Style Council, and have enjoyed some of the solo stuff since. It's great that people have just you can pick and choose whatever. It's absolutely fine for me.
I'm like yourself. I don't have an issue with any of it. It's all part of the thing that this country is great at putting out, really. I'm very proud of that,
Well, no, you should be. And I love the fact, like I say, for you, the honorary councillors and this badge of honour as part of that it all links into the story, because the Style Council without you guys isn't the Style Council as far as we're concerned. So, Billy, this has been lovely. I've got two final questions for you, if that's all right. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or Paul Weller solo. Which one are you going to go for? Let me give you the second question to give you some thinking time. So the point of this podcast is obviously to have a conversation with Paul at the end of the series, the conversation I never managed to have in my radio career. I gave that career up 10 years ago with that one regret, never getting to interview Paul Weller. If that happens, what should I talk to him about? Is there a question that you think I should ask him?
Wow. It's a very personal thing, as well as a very professional thing at the same time. So I don't know which one to choose. Well, the personal thing, I mean, I know that, we were kind of part of a family thing there, and in that sense. Relationships were quite good, in that sense. I've got great memories of his dad, for example, great, he's a very funny man, hilarious his dad was. And I just hope that he's still got that thing, he's all right as a person, really, feeling of some of those periods of time were a great thing, really. It's very difficult to say. On a professional level, I suppose it's just keep it going, just keep putting out these great material, really. That's all it's all about, really.
What about a song? Any ideas?
I like things like Head Start for Happiness and Long Hot Summer from the Style Council thing.
Head Start for Happiness wraps it completely lovely, because Hillary picked that same song.
Yeah.
That's is that a sax player's dream?
Well, I think it was one of the songs that I really enjoyed playing, It had, when you played that live, I'll do another one, Move On Up. But then again, that's not Style Council, that's Curtis Mayfield, but that was a great memory for me with the Sheffield thing, Because I can imagine the Sheffield Lead Mill was rocking when we played Move On Up. I mean, it's like, for me as a player, that was like, that was like Curtis Mayfield, with Paul Weller playing that, and the place was literally bouncing,
Move On Up is one that will please the Jam fans as well, because obviously it was on the Beat Surrender EP, wasn't it?
Well, that was one of the greatest moments for me was playing Move On Up, really. We had a couple of extra players on that gig, on the Red Wedge stuff. We had a few extra players, that were involved as well. The guy from Marth and the Smiths and things like that. And there was other players. I remember things like that, and it was just got a real mixture of well-known people, it's just fantastic. But I remember that night thinking, listen, you're not going to get much better than that. So, Billy,
this has been amazing. It's been so lovely to chat to you. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it, man.
Thank you for the invite, Dan. I appreciate, my mind is like spinning,
You'll be coming back to me all week going, there's this thing, I remember this and this and this.
Well, that's it. You've done a department of memories there. It's ridiculous. You don't realise until you start talking about it, you could go on and on, couldn't you, really? But all I can say is I've got some fantastic memories of that, and I'm very proud to have been an honorary councillor, and as the others have been, I'm sure,
Hey, Billy, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks a lot. Take care, man.
That was lovely. My thanks once again to Billy Chapman. So we've made it. 7 podcasts in 7 days and a celebration of probably the best pop group in the world, the Style Council. My thanks to the teams at Soul Deep, Stuart, Snowy and Steve, plus Mr. Cool's Dream, Ian Munn. Their books help so much with the research, I have to say. Now, next up, I'm joined by Neil Jones from the Stone Foundation, a band who have worked so collaboratively with Paul in recent years, whether it's him producing their album, singing on some real standout songs. You are going to love this one. Neil is fabulous. So make sure you subscribe and don't forget to share these episodes on social media. Leave a review wherever you get your podcast. It really, really does help us to find new listeners to the show. Check in on Twitter at Weller Fan Podcast. Let us know what you're liking. Plus, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Paul Weller Fan Podcast. I'll see you next time.